The United States has dramatically expanded its maritime campaign against Iran, signaling a new phase in an already volatile confrontation that is now stretching far beyond the Middle East. What began as a regional standoff in the Strait of Hormuz has evolved into a global enforcement strategy, with Washington now intercepting vessels thousands of kilometers away in the Indo-Pacific. The latest move underscores a clear shift. The battlefield is no longer confined to the Persian Gulf. Instead, it is extending into international waters across multiple regions, raising urgent questions about escalation, legality, and the future of global shipping routes. According to the Pentagon, American forces recently boarded a sanctioned oil tanker in the Indian Ocean as part of an intensified crackdown on vessels linked to Iran. Officials describe the operation as a maritime interdiction targeting illicit networks that support Tehran's oil exports and military supply chains. This marks the first time such an operation has been carried out so far from the traditional theater of conflict, reinforcing Washington's message that enforcement actions will not be geographically limited. A senior U.S. defense statement made the policy explicit. International waters are not a refuge for sanctioned vessels, U.S. defense officials. The implication is clear. Any vessel suspected of aiding Iran can now be intercepted anywhere in the world. This global expansion follows the formal imposition of a U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports earlier in April 2026 after diplomatic talks failed to produce a breakthrough. Within days of its enforcement, dozens of ships were either turned back or intercepted, highlighting the scale and reach of the operation. At the same time, tensions at sea have intensified. In one of the most serious incidents so far, U.S. naval forces reportedly used disabling fire against an Iranian-linked cargo vessel after it ignored repeated warnings. The ship was later boarded by Marines, signaling a more aggressive enforcement posture. The message from Washington is unmistakable. Compliance is no longer optional. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has framed these actions as part of a broader strategy to pressure Iran into negotiations. Speaking publicly, he pointed to intercepted shipments allegedly linked to China, expressing frustration over what he described as a breach of understanding. The ship had a gift from China. I was a little surprised. Donald Trump, president of the United States. Trump has repeatedly emphasized that Washington has presented what he calls a fair and reasonable deal, while warning that rejection could lead to severe consequences for Iran's infrastructure. However, Tehran has pushed back forcefully. Iranian leadership has accused the United States of undermining diplomacy through coercion. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf issued one of the strongest warnings yet, framing recent maritime actions as deliberate pressure tactics. No negotiations in the shadow of intimidation. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Iranian parliament speaker. He further accused Washington of attempting to transform diplomatic talks into what he described as a table of surrender, suggesting that Iran sees the current approach as fundamentally incompatible with meaningful negotiations. This sentiment has been echoed across Iran's political and military leadership. President Masoud Pezeshkian dismissed U.S. rhetoric as pressure-driven tactics, reiterating that Tehran would not yield to ultimatums. At the same time, Iran's military establishment has taken an even harder line. Officials have labeled recent U.S. maritime actions as violations of international law and, in some cases, outright piracy. These accusations reflect a growing perception within Iran that the United States is escalating the conflict while maintaining the appearance of negotiation. On the water, the situation is becoming increasingly volatile. A high-stakes confrontation is unfolding near Iran's key oil infrastructure, particularly around Karg Island, one of the most critical export terminals for Iranian crude. Reports suggest that an Iranian supertanker successfully navigated through what Tehran describes as a U.S. siege line, returning to Iranian waters after completing a large oil transfer. If confirmed, such movements would represent a significant challenge to Washington's blockade strategy, demonstrating that Iran retains the ability to maneuver despite mounting restrictions. Karg Island itself plays a central role in this contest. Located in the Persian Gulf, it handles a substantial portion of Iran's oil exports and serves as a major storage hub. Control over access to this facility is therefore a strategic priority for both sides. At the same time, Iran has sought to project confidence in its control over regional waterways. State media has released footage claiming that ships continue to move through the Strait of Hormuz under Iranian oversight. According to Iranian officials, a safe corridor has been established and is being managed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. This corridor, they claim, ensures that maritime traffic can continue, but only on Iran's terms. The United States, however, offers a starkly different narrative. American forces say they have already redirected dozens of vessels since the blockade began, either forcing them to turn back or preventing them from reaching Iranian ports. Newly surfaced footage appears to show U.S. military aircraft issuing direct warnings to ships approaching restricted areas. You are entering an area of a military blockade. If you attempt to run the blockade, we will compel compliance. U.S. naval broadcast. Such warnings highlight the increasingly confrontational nature of maritime interactions in the region. The border impact is already being felt across global shipping networks. Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy corridors, has reportedly dropped sharply, with far fewer vessels transiting the route than under normal conditions. Some ships are even turning off tracking systems in an attempt to avoid detection, creating what analysts describe as a growing shadow fleet operating in uncertain conditions. This disruption carries significant implications for global energy markets. At the diplomatic level, efforts to de-escalate the situation are struggling to gain traction. Talks expected to take place in Islamabad are now overshadowed by ongoing military actions. While both sides continue to signal openness to negotiation, their actions suggest a deepening divide. President Trump has insisted that diplomacy remains on the table, but his administration's simultaneous military moves have raised doubts about the sincerity of that position. Iran, for its part, appears increasingly skeptical. Officials have warned that any repeat of what they describe as past mistakes by the United States could trigger a decisive response. Behind the scenes, regional mediators are also facing mounting challenges. Pakistan, which has been playing a role in facilitating dialogue, is reportedly under pressure as maritime restrictions complicate efforts to bring both sides to the negotiating table. The overlap of diplomacy and deterrence is creating a highly unstable environment. On one hand, there is a clear push for negotiations. On the other, there is a visible buildup of military power and enforcement actions that risk pushing the situation toward open confrontation. This dual-track approach, talking while tightening pressure, has left both sides navigating a narrow and increasingly precarious path. As tensions continue to rise, the Strait of Hormuz has once again become the focal point of global attention. After briefly reopening following a ceasefire linked to broader regional developments, the waterway is now under renewed strain. The presence of warships, combined with competing claims of control, has turned it into a flashpoint where even minor incidents could escalate rapidly. For Iran, the current moment represents a test of resilience and sovereignty. For the United States, it is a demonstration of global enforcement capability and strategic reach. But for the wider world, it is a reminder of how quickly regional conflicts can expand into global crises. The warning from Tehran is clear and unmistakable. Pressure is not a path to compromise. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Iranian parliament speaker. Instead, Iranian leaders argue such pressure risks igniting a broader confrontation, one that could extend far beyond the waters of the Persian Gulf. As warships continue their silent standoff and diplomatic efforts hang in the balance, the situation remains on a razor's edge. Whether this crisis moves toward negotiation or escalation may depend not only on what is said at the negotiating table, but on what happens next at sea.